Thank you. Thank you. You guys are so great. Oh, sit down, for goodness sake. Gosh, thank you so much. It is always so much fun to come to see you guys because you always treat me so well. I mean, I get treated well most places I go. Well, like occasionally on university campuses, it doesn't always go so well there, but I always love coming back to Saddleback because it's just such a warm, engaging environment. And as Rick has said, I've been spending our sessions together, as I usually do, trying to give tools that will help followers of Christ to clarify their point of view, make it more understandable, and also more persuasive. And we call it apologetics, means giving a defense for our convictions. But I found, we covered some things in some of the other services, but I've just noticed something in the last, say, about 10 years that has been a shift in my own emphasis as I've talked with followers of Christ about these kinds of things. And I didn't notice it like my first 30 years as a Christian. I notice it now, something that's different. I still emphasize how you can maneuver in conversations, and we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. And I emphasize answers to challenges and questions and the like. But something keeps coming back to mind by way of emphasis that I hadn't noticed before. And just to sum it up in a word, it's the word courage. Courage. I keep thinking of this verse in Revelations that says, strengthen that which remains and is on the verge of perishing. And I don't think we're there yet, but this strengthen that which remains keeps coming back at me because I see a certain shift in culture over the last 10 years especially. A shift in culture that has made it more difficult for followers of Christ to be faithful and courageous in communicating their convictions to others. And I think that this trend is not going to get better. It's going to get worse. And this is why I find my comments more and more laced with encouragements to believers to having done everything to stand firm. And so tonight, I want to talk a little bit more about that. How do you, as followers of Christ, engage with your friends without fear? Well, I've got a couple of suggestions about that. I paused for a moment there because I was thinking, I don't know if we ever get over the fear, because I don't think courage is not having fear, but courage is the willingness to act in the midst of fear. And there are some things that we can do to help us in that enterprise. One thing that I see that helps me to be courageous is if I have some knowledge about some things, and the knowledge then gives me more confidence, and if I'm aware of some answers, that helps me. And also, if I have decided in advance about something important. If I have decided in advance about something important. You know, they tell you if you're trying to learn self-defense, and you're afraid about going out in the streets, and so they show you some moves, they tell you first, you decide first before you go out there if you confront what you're going to do, how you're going to stand. Because that mental attitude of knowing in advance where you stand, how you act, that will help you to carry out when the circumstances are rough. So something like that is what I want to talk about in our session together. I mentioned a shift in the culture. A lot of folks ask, well, what happened? You know, 9/11, did people start coming back to church after 9/11? And if you were around then, many of you were, although I realize that's like 13 years ago now. Oh, my goodness. And so a lot of you who are younger, this is a vague memory. But those who are older, you know the church is filled up, right? For a few weeks. And then everything went back to normal. Except for there was a change in our culture. And I think it was signaled by an article that Thomas Friedman wrote in the New York Times when the smoke was still billowing from the Twin Towers there in New York City. The article was called The Real War. And what he wrote there is that the real war that we're facing is not a war against terrorism. That's just a tool in this real war. The real war was against what he called religious totalitarianism. Now, what's religious totalitarianism? It's the view that a person thinks his own religion is actually true. Now, the people who flew those planes into the Twin Towers and into the a field in Pennsylvania and into the Pentagon, did they believe their religious views were true? Of course they did. They gave their life for it. But they're not the only ones who think their views are true. Many people in this room are deeply committed to the truth of what Jesus brought to us and entrusted to us. But Thomas Friedman lumped us all together as fundamentalists, and he didn't make the distinction between different groups. That Christian fundamentalists would likely pray for you, and that Muslim fundamentalists might kill you. No, they're all the same. And so from that time, and that was right around when the New Atheists started publishing and getting really popular, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris. And there's nothing new about their arguments. Their point of view is the same. Their arguments are the same. They have a new attitude. They're angry, a lot angrier than the 20th century atheists. And they also not only think we're wrong if you're a follower of Christ, they think we're dangerous. We're the threat. We're the danger. Thomas Friedman says the future of civilization may depend on how we fight this war. And in the last 10 years, I have seen a tremendous amount of hostility just coming out of everywhere. Why? What did we do? In fact, the irony is, it took fundamentalist Muslims to fly planes into the towers, etc., kill 2,973 Americans and visitors on American soil for Islam to have most favored religious status in our country and Christians to be viewed as the enemy. How does that work? This is the reality of what we're up against. So if we are going to be faithful in this kind of environment, I think there's three things that we need, and that's what I want to cover with you now. We need a plan. We need some information. And then we need that thing I was talking about a few moments ago. We need a line in the sand, and we need to know where that line is that we will not cross. Now, in earlier sessions, I talked a bit about the plan, and you can catch in detail that on videos. So I'm just going to briefly speak to it. I have a plan whenever I go out. It's actually captured in this book, Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian conviction. There's still a few left in the back. You can get one if you want. On the outside, I'll be there signing afterwards. But I'll give you a little summary of what this plan entails. What I've done with my own game plan, there in the book, is I have changed my goal whenever I engage people about the Lord. And this will be somewhat controversial, and I don't have a lot of time to explain it. But I did in other services. Let me just say this. I personally, Christian 41 years now, full-time Christian work in apologetics, which is a subset of evangelism. I never have it as a goal when I talk to people in conversations that I hope will lead to spiritual things. I never have it as a goal to lead that person to Christ. In fact, I don't even know if I'm going to get to the gospel. Now, why is that? Because I don't care if this person becomes a Christian? No, that's the most important thing. Because the gospel isn't important to that end. It is the power of God to salvation to everyone who believes. No, I believe in all of that. I just understand the nature of the circumstances in our culture now. Is that we can't just barrel forward with the simple gospel. In effect, we're going to make it and expect to make a difference. Things have changed. The easy pickings are over. Now we have to go more slowly. We have to listen more. We have to ask more questions. We have to do what we can do little bit by little bit by little bit. We're all on a team together, and we're all doing our part. And so it isn't about harvesting everything every time we go out. For me, it's more about gardening, because you cannot have a harvest unless you've had a season of gardening, right? The harvest is always a season away, kind of. Nobody comes to Christ, really, from 0 to 60 in 1 minute. I have two people that I've known in my life that's been the case. Everybody else takes a lot of time, and this is especially true now. So what I've done is I made a change in my expectation. I'm not swinging for the fences. I'm not trying to even get on base. I just got a very simple expectation for any conversation. I just want to put a stone in people's shoes, all right? I just want to give them something worth thinking about. and I'm going to engage them. I have another aspect of the plan I'll tell you in a moment, but I'm going to draw them out, and I'm going to look for an opportunity. If God gives me an opportunity, I might slide something in there. It may be something that I know about apologetics. It may be some challenge that I offer them about their own thinking, maybe plant a seed of doubt in their mind. It might be just being really nice to them when they don't expect Christians to be nice to them. Maybe that's what I end up doing. I just want to put a stone in their shoe. I'm a gardener. I'm not a harvester. And I look back at my life for 40 years as a follower of Christ. I've been gardening a lot. And so I've taken now the pressure off of myself in conversations to think, okay, I gotta try to get this person to sign on the dotted line. No, for many of you, if that's what was expected of you, you wouldn't get off the bench, right? Man, I can't do that, so I'm not gonna do anything. I'm saying you could do something. If you make it as a goal to move people a little further forward, do a little gardening, and I don't know what that looks like in any individual situation. The Lord will have to help you find that out. But that's my goal. So I have a changed goal. I'm gonna be gardening. I'm going to put a stone in their shoe. And by the way, if you're not a follower of Christ tonight, I'm glad you're here. I'm not here to convert you. I just want to put a stone in your shoe tonight. I want to annoy you in a good way, all right? I want you walking out that door going, that bothered me. I got to think about it. Great, all right, I'm happy, okay? Now, how do I get people thinking? How do I make this work? I use a tactic that I call the Columbo Tactic. Remember him, Lieutenant Columbo? Now, I actually put on my Columbo jacket the other services, and I acted it out. I don't have time for that. I want to get on to some other thing. Columbo solved crimes by asking questions. And so I want you to think in terms of your game plan that what you're going to do is you're going to test the field, so to speak, to see if there's an opening to do some gardening by asking questions. Holidays are coming up, Thanksgiving, Christmas. Sometimes that's nasty time around the table. Big arguments ensue. Why don't you just spend your time asking questions? How about these two questions? First one, what do you mean by that? Actually, I should say that again. What do you mean by that? It sounded like a what do you mean by that, and that's not the way I mean it. That is, you draw other people out and find out their points of view. I bet you had a lot of arguments with family and friends over turkeys in the past couple of years, and you never once listened to their point of view because you're thinking too much about what you wanted to say. Why don't you just commit yourself this year to not arguing at all, but just asking questions to learn about their view? And then some other time, on your own, at your leisure, you might think about a better way to engage them based on what you now know. So you ask them, what do you mean by that? Here's another question. Once you get clear on what they mean, maybe you get clear on their own views, why not ask him, how did you come to that conclusion? Or what are your reasons for that? Now, these are model questions. You can use lots of variations. But the main thing is, and here's my game plan, I'm not trying to convert people. I'm trying to garden them. And we'll see what God does, okay? I do that by asking questions. I try to figure out what their views are and what they really believe, and I want to know why they believe it. That's it. I'm not swinging for the fences. I'm just getting in the batter's box. You use those two questions to get in the batter's box, then watch and see what God does, okay? So that's the first point. You got to have a game plan. That'll give you more. Do you think if you have that game plan in your mind, does that already make you feel a little bit more bold, a little bit more confident, a little bit more willing to reach out? Sure. Okay, so you got a game plan. Second thing, you need to know some things. You need some knowledge. For one, you need to know the gospel. And if you think that communicating the gospel will be accomplished by telling people that Jesus loves them and he died for them, and if they believe in him, they'll go to heaven, which, by the way, all of those things are completely true. But if you think that's going to do it, forget about it. That's just spiritual noise to people nowadays. You're going to have to go more slowly, explain the program. And I think a lot of Christians have a hard time explaining the big picture because they don't see the big picture. They have slogans that they believe in and they understand in a very truncated kind of way. But when they get pushed back and ask for more clarification, they get a little bit lost. They haven't seen the forest for the trees, I think. And so I put together a teaching, and I'm not going to do that here. Maybe you can ask Rick to have me come back I call it Credo. I'm writing a book on it. Credo, the story of reality. And what I do in the book and in the talk is I show how you can take the whole story of Christianity and capture it in 5 words. That is, the plot line is suggested by 5 different words. It's the storyline. It's the frame of the picture, if you will. There are different ways to characterize it. But for me, this allows me to see the big thing, and so when I want to talk about particulars, I know where they fit in. Now, our story starts like this. In the beginning, what? God. That's the first part of our story, right? It's his story. It's about him. It's not about us. God made a place for man so that man, the special creature made in his image, can be in a friendship with him. But there was a rebellion which made God mad, created a problem for man. And so instead of judging man, God became a man himself in the person of Jesus to execute a rescue operation. That rescue operation culminated at a place called Golgotha on a cross. And what anyone decides about what happened at Golgotha on that cross will determine what happens to them at the final resurrection. There's your 5 words: God, man, Jesus, cross, resurrection. Now this you can get because at an earlier service, my daughter was sitting right over here, and she's 6, and she had her hand up, and she's counting it off as I was telling it to the audience. She got it, you can get it. God, man, Jesus, cross, resurrection. This is the outline of the story. You put all the parts in there. That's the big picture. You gotta know that. You gotta know it well enough to explain it to other people in a way that makes sense to them. But I think you need to know some more things because of the hostility and the way the rhetoric has gone. You have to know how to dodge certain challenges. Now, apologetics is a field where we have trained people that step up and train you with answers to all kinds of challenges. No, I'm not going to cover all the bases in this session. In fact, in weekends in the past, you've had a lot of great people on the stage to do that. Lots of books, websites, ours for one, str.org, in case you're interested. STR, stand to reason, str.org. But there are a couple of peculiar challenges that we face right now that I think you need to answer. And these are the kinds of things that just seem hard to get by, and I'm going to offer you a way of dealing with them. Because part of the message we need to know is that Jesus is the source of salvation, but he is the only source of salvation because there is no one else who did what Jesus did. He is the only way of salvation because he's the only one who solved the problem. And that is a central part of our message, but this is a thing that really, really bothers people. And I'm sympathetic. I understand from where they sit how this sounds narrow-minded, arrogant, bigoted. How could that be? All religions are legitimate ways to God. So let me give you a couple of maybe maneuvers that will allow you to traffic or to manage in that with those challenges, okay? And I want you to think of this illustration. You might even use this with somebody. Let's say your friend goes to the doctor. You go with him because he's not feeling well. The doctor examines your friend, and the doctor says, you know what? You got cancer. It's, we can deal with it, but it's bad. And if you don't take care of this right now, you're going to die. Not good news. Your friend looks at the doctor, and he says, you're mean. I'm going to go find another doctor that isn't so mean. Now, if you're the friend, if you're the one listening in, you're going to wonder, gee, that's odd. Because maybe the doctor is mean, but he's not mean because he's given that diagnosis, right? That doesn't even go to the issue. The question isn't about his character, it's about whether he's a good medical doctor. So your friend has missed the point, but even worse than that, it's foolish. Because, or even stupid, because maybe the doctor is right. And if you don't attend to this thing right now, then you're going to die. He's going to die. Well, see, this is the problem that we're facing here. Let me just change the illustration. Somebody says, Jesus Christ is the solution for the problem that you have with God right now. And somebody says back, you're mean. But they don't use the word mean, do they? They say you're intolerant. You're narrow-minded. You're arrogant if you think that's the case. Now, the parallel is a good parallel because it may be that a Christian who gives this message is intolerant, narrow-minded, and arrogant. Can you see that if that person has those character flaws, it has nothing to do with whether or not he's right about Jesus? I hope he doesn't have those flaws, but people who object on that grounds are missing the point entirely. And the physician illustration is apt because Christians are convinced that people are dying of a spiritual disease. Whether they're right or wrong, please understand that we're motivated by concern out of other people. And the real question isn't whether we're arrogant or intolerant. The real question is whether we're right or not. And you're never going to find that out by calling names. You're only going to find that out, not by looking at the Christian, but by looking at Jesus. And it also might be really foolish to do that. First, it misses the point. Secondly, it might be foolish because those Christians might turn out to be right. And if you react that way and push them away for that silly reason, you might miss the best thing in eternity, okay? So I want to put that in perspective, and I want to give you a way, as a follower of Christ, of how to respond when people call you a name like that. When they say, well, you're intolerant, for example. When somebody says that you're intolerant, you always have to ask for a definition. What do you mean by that? All right? Now, I think I know what they mean by that. I just want to get their meaning out on the table. I think they're bugged at me because I think I'm right. And actually, that's what they usually say. Well, you're intolerant because you think you're right on this particular issue. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you think that I think I'm right on the things that I believe spiritually speaking? Yes, of course I think I'm right. That's why I believe what I believe. If I didn't think I was right, I wouldn't believe what I believed. I'd believe something else and think that we're right. Just like everybody else, though. And here's the key. To hold a belief is to hold an attitude that you think your belief is true. I mean, there's no way around that. Everybody who believes anything thinks their beliefs are true. In other words, I'm not the only one in the discussion who thinks I'm right. The other person who's challenging me thinks he or she is right as well. So I have a question that I ask them. They say, you're intolerant. I say, what do you mean by that? Well, you think you're right. And I say, well, I do think I'm right, and I could be mistaken. I'm willing to talk about that, but what about you? The views that you have, do you think you're right? What are they going to say? Oh, I'm wrong about everything I believe in? They think they're right too. But now they might say, well, I think I'm right for me. To which I'll respond, well, if you think you're just right for you, then why are you talking to me right now? It does feel a little bit like you're trying to correct me, right? I'm the intolerant one, you're the tolerant one, okay. So you think you're right. Now, final question. Why is it when I think that I'm right, I'm intolerant? But when you think you're right, you're just right. What am I missing here? Well, I'm not missing anything because all that's going on here is just name calling. When people call you intolerant, arrogant, bigoted, whatever it happens to be, they have changed the topic from whatever you were talking about. Jesus, same-sex marriage, abortion, some ethical issue. They've changed it completely, and now they're attacking you. And now they're off the grid, but they don't know it. And that's why the questions go back and forth to help them to see it. It's not a gotcha. It's to help them to see that they're not talking about anything legitimate now when they're attacking your character. Look, what if they said, you're intolerant, and I said, and you're ugly? No, I wouldn't say that, but tell me how that's different. They attack my character, I attack their looks. Nobody's talking about the issue anymore. We're doing the kind of thing that when we were in junior high school, our teachers and our parents told us not to do. But now we're grown-ups, and this is what passes as intelligent discussion. So there's a little insight and a maneuver that will help you, hopefully, to dodge that bullet, okay? But I also want to explain to you why the view that all religions are equally true is just plain false. I think the view is false, and I don't think that just because I'm a Christian. I talked to a guy on an airplane. We were flying from Los Angeles to San Francisco, got in a small conversation. And he said, you're probably one of those guys that think that 90% of the people in the world are wrong in their religious views. And then the word hate kind of came into the conversation at that point. And my response was basically, yeah, I guess I am one of those kind of people, but that's not because I'm hateful or bigoted. It's just simple math. So let me explain what I'm talking about. About 10 years ago, I was asked to come out to Toronto. They flew me out to be part of a TV show called The Test of Faith. And The Test of Faith is a program where they talk about religious topics, they fly in some religious weirdo, they put him in the hot seat, and then they have a table, semicircle with other people around, and they beat up on the religious weirdo for an hour on national TV. Kind of fun. Where do you think Mr. Koukl was seated, by the way, in that particular show? I was the weirdo in the hot seat. Now, what was my weird religious view? I rejected the idea of religious pluralism. And here, what that means is I rejected the idea that all religions were equally true and legitimate ways to God. And I explained at the time that I was going to give an argument to them that did not trade on my own religious convictions. I could have argued this way. I could have argued, I'm a Christian, I believe in Jesus. Jesus said he was the only way, therefore other ways are false, and there you have it. Now that's a way of arguing, and I think it's a legitimate way. But if I had argued that way, I would have brought all the attention on attacking Christianity, and I didn't want that to be the focus. I wanted to be talking about pluralism, all right? And so this was my strategy. Now, just before we started, there was a young man there who was part of the crew, and he's the guy, his name was Pierre. He was the guy who had called me a couple of months before to set up the arrangement, the TV show. And when you do these kinds of things, you always get a phone call and an interview because they want to make sure that you're weird enough to be on their show, okay? So we talked for an hour and a half on the phone, and he thought, yep, this guy's really weird, we'll have him. They flew me out to Toronto, there I was in the hot seat. But before the show started, I talked with Pierre a little bit. And I said, Pierre, let me make a gentleman's bet with you here. I have an idea about the way this show is going to go. I'm going to give an argument against pluralism, and the rest of the people on the panel are going to ignore my argument, and they're going to start attacking me personally. And they're going to use words like narrow-minded, and arrogant, and intolerant, and that kind of thing. I don't know. Maybe it won't happen, but I've seen this happen before. Let's just see, all right? So first session, I'm by myself in the hot seat. Valerie Pringle, the host, wants to interview me for the first 5-minute segment before we bring the rest of the crowd up. And so I get to make my case against pluralism. And here's the argument that I offered. Remember, this does not trade on my own religious convictions. I said, Jesus claimed to be the Messiah, right? He either was the Messiah or he wasn't the Messiah. If he wasn't the Messiah, then the Christians are wrong, and the Jews are right on that point. If he was the Messiah, then the Jews are wrong and the Christians are right, but under no circumstances can they both be basically right, can they? If there's a God, maybe it's an open question. He's either personal or not personal. If he's personal, then the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims are right on that point, and the Hindus are wrong. If it turns out that he is not personal, well, then the Hindus are right, and the Jews and Christians and Muslims are wrong, but under no circumstance can they both be right, can they? When you die, you either go to heaven or hell, or you go to astral worlds, or maybe you get reincarnated, but you can't do them all at the same time. Somebody's making a mistake. Actually, most people are making a mistake. The reason that all religions cannot be true is because they have contradictory claims about reality. It might be that they're all wrong. It might be that my view is wrong, but they can't all be right. So there's my argument. By the way, that's a pretty good argument. You can use it if you like. Then they started bringing the other contestants up, you know. First was a gentleman, a Sikh from Toronto. He was a barrister there, an attorney. A Sikh is the religious order. The gentleman wear the turban. He was really nice to me in the green room, but boy, he was hopping mad when he got out. And he started out, here's what he said, the first thing he said. Valerie Pringle asked him what he thought of my comments. He had heard them on the screen, you know how that goes. And he said, well, if Mr. Koukl thinks he won the lottery, good for him. What? What is he talking about? Is he talking about my argument against pluralism? No, he went on the internet, checked out str.org, and found out what I did, knew I was a Christian, and he was going after me because I thought I was right. Now, that was kind of a passive-aggressive beginning. He didn't stay passive for long. Pretty soon, he's shaking papers that he printed out from our website across the way in my face, and he is hopping mad. Valerie's got to push him down in his chair twice. And then Hindu pastor comes out, then a liberal Christian pastor, a woman from the United Church of Canada, pluralists all after me. And it's very interesting what began to happen. Certain words began creeping into the conversation. Words like arrogant and narrow-minded and intolerant. And I made the observation, I said, it's interesting where the conversation's gone. We first started out talking about an issue called pluralism, and somehow the topic got changed onto Mr. Koukl's personality. Mr. Koukl's arrogant, Mr. Koukl's narrow-minded, Mr. Koukl's mean, I guess. All right, I said to them, why don't I just admit it? Why don't I admit that I'm mean? We all agree on that. Now can we get back to the topic? In fact, I said, you're arguing against me so aggressively because I'm a Christian, which I did not put on the table, by the way. So apparently you think that I'm wrong from the Christian perspective, which means then, at least my understanding of Christianity is wrong, and all those who agree with this particular view, which then means Christianity is not a legitimate religious view. It's a wrong religious view. Well, that means then that there are some religious views that are not true, but are false, mine. So if you're right in the way you're attacking me right now, then you're wrong about what we're supposed to be talking about here today. They didn't get it. One whole hour, they didn't get it. You know who got it? Who got it? Pierre, the atheist, got it, and he was hopping mad at the Sikh. In fact, he bounded up on the stage, and he was letting me know all about it, and he was using language that was appropriate for an atheist, No, it is not bigoted necessarily to believe your religion is right, another religion. It is not intolerant. It isn't narrow-minded. Look, if I am any of those things, intolerant, narrow-minded, or bigoted, or you are, shame on us. But that is unrelated to the question that is the important question. All religions can't be true. It's not bigotry. It's just simple math. So, what have I been saying so far? In order to increase your courage, which is going to be needed, and it's needed now more than ever before as a follower of Christ, first you need a plan. I said there are two parts to that plan. One, you modify your goal and try to do some gardening instead of harvesting. You want to put a stone in their shoe, get them thinking. Secondly, how you do that? You do that with questions, and I suggested 2 questions. What do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? Or some variation. I also said you need some knowledge. You need knowledge of our story. And the better you get at that, the better you're going to be at communicating, okay? But you also, it'd be good to have some defensive maneuvers, and I gave you a few right there. I think all of these are in the book on tactics, by the way, just so you know. Here's the third thing you need. You need a line in the sand. Your line in the sand, not theirs. Now, I just want to warn you in advance that a lot of you are not going to like what I'm about to say. I understand that. Okay? But I'm going to tell you the truth, and I figure if I can tell you the truth and do it in a nice way that you're adult enough to take my words and judge them for yourself. I want to look back about 50 years at something that happened that I think is instructive for us. Been reading the book Bonhoeffer by Eric Metaxas. It's a fabulous account of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's life. In 1933, he was a 27-year-old Lutheran pastor living in Berlin. And the way the political winds were blowing at that time, there was a law that was passed that had a paragraph in it called the Aryan Paragraph. And the Aryan Paragraph was a restriction of liberty of Jews in government positions. That is, no person who is Jewish could hold a government position. And since the church was a state church, this had implications for the church. And there were Jews who had become followers of Christ that were within the leadership of the church. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer understood that this would mean that the Jews that were in leadership would have to be let go. And the majority of the church, the Christian church in Germany, was happy to let that happen. Because as far as they were concerned, it was one people, one Reich, one church. Let's just go with the flow. That was their idea. But Bonhoeffer understood that he couldn't do that. Because in the church, there is neither Jew nor Greek. We don't make these kinds of distinctions. Now, you need to understand, and it's already pretty obvious to you, that this idea of neither Jew nor Greek in the church is rather low on the theological pecking order. This isn't about salvation. This isn't about the deity of Christ. This isn't about the resurrection. It's not a big thing. It's a smaller thing. But you see, Bonhoeffer understood it for what it was. And he says, the minute we let the culture tell us what the church has to be like, then when we evangelize, we're no longer evangelizing people to a church that has Jesus Christ in it anymore. And he knew he had to resist. And he did. And he reasoned, and he argued, and he cajoled. And he wrote letters, and he gave sermons, and he engaged people, and then he prayed, and then he hoped, and he waited. And finally, when he'd done everything, and all the other Christians like them had done everything they could, they simply said, no. We will not go along with that. We will not obey that law. We will not support it. We will not endorse it. We will oppose it by every means available. We will defy it with grace and with courage, but we will not cross that line. Bonhoeffer wrote, we must shake off our fear of this world. The cause of Christ is at stake. Are we to be found sleeping? Now you understand the nature of the time in which he wrote this. There was a lot at stake for him. And in fact, he lost his life at the gallows in 1945. Another pastor, Martin Niemöller, 6 years in Dachau, and many others like him. Niemöller survived. Bonhoeffer did not. Now, today in our culture, we do not have an Aryan Paragraph, thankfully. Jews are not being singled out for ill treatment. Christians are being singled out for ill treatment. The current source of conflict has largely been a single general issue. But a more important one lies in the wings. The issue is not ethnicity, it's ethics. The issue in the culture is the morality of homosexuality and the propriety of same-sex marriage. Now, please hear me on this. What I'm about to say is not animated in any way by hostility towards gays. That's not what I'm talking about here. My comments are not about homosexuality. There are many people in here that have questions about that. They haven't resolved their issues. Some are struggling with same-sex attraction or not struggling with it, whatever. That's not on the table here, friends, believe me. In fact, my comments are not about sex at all. It's about a trend. It's about a trajectory. It's about our culture, something that's happened that should concern every single person regardless of their sexual preferences. What has happened is the culture has drawn a line in the sand. That line has a name. It's called tolerance. They're on the other side. They are beckoning to Christians. They are saying, come join us, cross over, celebrate diversity, and we will like you. But if you do not, we will hurt you. And I am using my words advisedly. Let me give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. In May this year, Michael Sam, football player, openly gay, drafted by St. Louis, after which he kissed his partner on camera. I don't care about that. No big deal. But it kind of grossed out some other football players. And one just made the mistake, defensive back for the Miami Dolphins, Don Jones, tweeting, OMG, horrible. The Dolphins fined him, they benched him, and banned him from team activities until he underwent sensitivity training. Now look, you may not like what he had to say. I don't think it would bother most people. But that's the response of his team for a football player to go to sensitivity training. By the way, I wonder if this is going to be a trend that every time a player or a coach uses Jesus' name or God's name in a way that's offensive to Christians, do they get sent to sensitivity training? I don't think so. April of this year, Brendan Eich, you might recognize his name if you're into digital things. He's the Mozilla co-founder, creator of JavaScript. This guy's a player. He had to resign as CEO of Mozilla. He lost his job as CEO of the company he founded. Why? Because 5 years before, he had given money to Prop 8 here in California. Somebody found out and outed him. And because he had given money to Prop 8, which was a proposition that defended marriage between a man and a woman, just because he had weighed in politically, he lost his job. Now listen to what they said when they let him go. Executive Chairwoman Mitchell Baker said, you know, Ike's view on same-sex marriage was shocking to me because I never saw any kind of behavior or attitude from him that was not in line with Mozilla's values of inclusiveness. In other words, he was a model employee. He was doing everything that he was supposed to do, but because 5 years before he had given money to something that was politically incorrect, he got bounced. And I'm telling you, if it can happen to Brendan Eich, it can happen to you. And it has happened to people just like you. Apparently, it was a violation of their principles of tolerance to let anyone stay in leadership who did not support same-sex marriage. Think about that statement. It was a violation of their principles of tolerance. You're intolerant, get out. Now you're getting it. Andrew Sullivan, probably the most active homosexual voice in America right now, said this whole episode about Ike disgusts me, and it should just disgust anyone interested in a tolerant, diverse society. If this is the gay rights movement today, hounding our opponents with a fanaticism more like the religious right than anyone else, then count me out. That's why I say this isn't about homosexuality. This is about freedom and civility. August last year, Justice Richard Bosson, Supreme Court of the state of New Mexico, in judging against a couple who were photographers who refused to do a same-sex wedding, even though they had plenty of gay customers they were happy to serve, said that the Huguenot are free to think. This, by the way, is his opinion in the Supreme Court judgment that came down against the photographers in the state of Mexico, New Mexico. The Huguenots are free to think, thank you, to say, to believe, as they wish. They may pray to the God of their choice and follow those commandments in their personal lives wherever they lead. But they are now compelled by the law to compromise the very religious beliefs that inspire their lives. Well, let me go over that again in case you missed it. You can think the way you want. You can believe the way you want. But you must surrender your religious convictions to obey the law. Supreme Court Justice, State of New Mexico, August 2013. That's the law. If I were pro-gay, this would scare me. Chick-fil-A, Dan Cathy, Chicago and New York, told him clearly, unless you share our values, you can't do business in our cities. What was that? Unless you share our whose values? Your values? We can't do business in your city. Do you know that over 20 states have invidious discrimination? Well, they all have this. Let me back up and put it this way. In over 20 states in the union, you cannot be on the bench as a judge if you have anything to do with Boy Scouts. Because the Boy Scouts practice invidious discrimination. And that sullies your ability to judge properly, so you can't even be on the bench. The state of California was considering this for the bar. That means if you are involved in any group that practices what they think is invidious discrimination, you can't even be an attorney. Do you know any other groups that maybe share the same point of view about homosexuality as the Boy Scouts? How about most of the Christian churches in our community? And if you can't be a judge that is involved with the Boy Scouts for that reason, how long will it be before you can't be a judge involved with any church for that reason? Do you see the trend here? Do you see why I'm concerned? No, I'm not whining and crying. I'm not saying, hey, I got my rights. I think there are good people out there like ADF that are helping us with that. That's not my point. My point is the wind is shifting. The tides are turning. And this is a pattern. And whether or not we succeed through godly influence to alter this trend, and I'm not counting on that, but that's not my concern. My concern is rescuing that which remains. My concern is you and all of my brothers and sisters in Christ, that when they stand up to that line and they're beckoned and screamed at from the other side, that they do not cross it. Because this is our Aryan paragraph, I'm convinced. This is the place where our culture is telling us, is asking, are you going to be faithful to Christ? This is the place where we have to say, we will not surrender or be bullied into denying the Savior that bought us. Like Bonhoeffer, we can reason and we can argue, we can cajole, we can preach sermons, we can engage, we give our apologetics, we write letters, and finally we just have to say what? No. No. I will not support those things contrary to Christ. Here I stand, I can do no other. We draw our own line in the sand, my friends. We draw the line. And that line is truth and faithfulness. That's what that line says. And we do not cross over. In Proverbs, it says, the fear of man is a snare. John writes, friendship with the world is antagonism towards God. We stand firm. We draw our own line. The cause of Christ is at stake, and are we to be found sleeping? So let me ask you a final question. Almost finished. Are you willing to be called a bigot for Christ? Paul was called a fool for Christ. He wasn't a fool. The gospel's not foolishness. In 1 Corinthians chapter 2, he said the gospel is foolishness to those who are perishing. It's the wisdom of God. The outsiders think it's dumb. What did he say? You think it's foolish? All right, God is well pleased by the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. You think that's dumb? You think I'm an idiot? All right, I can wear the label for the sake of the gospel. So here's my question. Are you willing to wear the label bigot? Paul wasn't a fool. You're not a bigot. But are you willing to be called one, labeled one, to wear that label, to be identified with Christ? Jesus said in Matthew chapter 10, 3 times, do not fear them. Do not fear them. Do not fear them. Look it up. And I'm saying to you with Jesus, make your decision now. Decide before the pressure's on. Plan in advance to stand firm on this issue, not with hate, not with rancor, with grace, with firmness, with courage. We say no to the world. We say yes to Christ. They have their line in the sand. Where's your line? 4 days ago, Rick Warren in the Vatican, talking on marriage, said this: when God's word is clear, we cannot back up, back down, back off, or give in. Friends, too much is at stake. So make up your mind on what side of the line you will stand. Savior, we desperately need your grace and your courage to stand with the saints of the past and the saints of the present against the world and for you. And we know this isn't easy, and it makes our hands sweat, it makes our knees shake when we countenance the challenge that is coming and that may get worse here and probably will, where we have to pay a price. But Lord, by your grace, we want to stand with you. We ask you to help us And I pray for this church, Lord. I thank you for the leadership, for the courage. Thank you for the message. Thank you for your grace on these people. And I pray that you would help us all to be able to say at the end of our lives that we have kept the faith, that we have finished the faith for Christ's sake. Amen. Thank you.